In 1904, the British government published a consular report. It ran 40 pages in the Parliamentary papers. Appended to it were another 20 pages of individual statements, testimonies gathered by a single British diplomat who had traveled over 3,000 kilometers into the interior of the Congo. The statements described killings, mutilations, kidnappings, and cruel beatings of the native population by soldiers who answered directly to one man, King Leopold II of Belgium. What the report revealed was not a colonial administration gone slightly too far. It was a system designed to extract rubber from the Congolese people at gunpoint and to sever their hands as proof that bullets had not been wasted. The report named names. It listed specific villages, specific dates, specific officials. In 1904, the British government published a consular report. It ran 40 pages in the Parliamentary papers. Appended to it were another 20 pages of individual statements, testimonies gathered by a single British diplomat who had traveled over 3,000 kilometers into the interior of the Congo. The statements described killings, mutilations, kidnappings, and cruel beatings of the native population by soldiers who answered directly to one man, King Leopold II of Belgium. What the report revealed was not a colonial administration gone slightly too far. It was a system designed to extract rubber from the Congolese people at gunpoint and to sever their hands as proof that bullets had not been wasted. The report named names. It listed specific villages, specific dates, specific officials. The conference granted Leopold private ownership of a territory, not a colony belonging to Belgium, a personal estate belonging to the king himself. The Congo Free State was, legally speaking, Leopold's private property, and it was enormous, over 2.6 million square kilometers, 85 times the size of Belgium. For the first decade of his private empire, Leopold struggled to turn a profit. Then, in the 1890s, a global boom in natural rubber changed everything. The Congo Basin was rich with wild rubber vines, and suddenly there was immense wealth to be extracted. But there was a problem. Rubber collection was labor-intensive. Local populations had little incentive to spend weeks walking into the forest, cutting vines and hauling latex back to trading posts. So Leopold's administration solved this problem the way private empires always have. They used force. Between 1891 and 1906, all vacant land in the Congo was nationalized. Most of it was distributed to private companies as concessions. The companies were allowed to operate with almost no oversight. Their mandate was simple: extract rubber, extract it cheaply, extract as much as possible. To enforce this mandate, Leopold created a military force called the Force Publique. It was not a peacekeeping force. It was an enforcement army, and its primary duty was to make sure the Congolese people met their rubber quotas. If a village failed to deliver enough rubber, the Force Publique would burn the village to the ground. If individual workers refused to participate, they were killed. But the most infamous punishment was something else entirely. Soldiers in the Force Publique were required to account for every bullet they fired. They had to prove they had not wasted ammunition on hunting or sport. So they began taking hands. Severed hands from living victims were presented to their officers as proof of a bullet well spent. When the quota was not met, the hands of men, women, and children were amputated to make the quota clear. This was not an accident. It was not the act of rogue soldiers. It was official policy, documented, tracked, and incentivized. And here is the documented scale of what this system destroyed. Between 1885 and 1908, the population of the Congo Free State declined sharply. Estimates vary. A recent demographic study suggests a loss of between 1.2 and 1.5 million people. Older estimates go much higher, up to 13 million over the full period. The direct cause of many deaths was disease. sleeping sickness, smallpox, dysentery. But disease was not the root cause. The root cause was the systematic destruction of Congolese society by Leopold's labor policies. Forced labor pulled people away from their farms and into the forests. Famine followed. People were displaced from their homes. Birth rates collapsed. And in 1901 alone, an estimated 500,000 Congolese died from sleeping sickness, a disease that spread faster because the colonial administration had disrupted every normal pattern of life. But here is what makes this impossible to dismiss as coincidence. The rubber quotas were not vague. They were specific. Villages were told exactly how much rubber to deliver, and if they failed, the punishment was documented. Testimonies collected by missionaries and traders began to reach Europe, and the British government, which had signed the Berlin Act and was therefore bound to enforce its terms, could no longer ignore what was happening. In 1903, the British Foreign Office ordered its consul at Boma to investigate. The consul's name was Roger David Casement. He was born in 1864 in Kingstown, Ireland. He had worked for commercial interests in Africa before joining the British Colonial Service, and by 1903 he had already spent years in the region, first in Portuguese East Africa, then in Angola, then as British consul in the Congo Free State itself. His instructions arrived in June 1903. He did not wait. He immediately chartered a steamboat, but not from the Congo administration. That would have been dangerous. Instead, he chartered a vessel from the American Baptist Missionary Union, paying for it himself to maintain his independence from the authorities. He spent the next 3 months traveling through the Upper Congo region, interviewing survivors, documenting depopulated villages, and gathering sworn testimonies from witnesses. What Casement found was worse than any report had suggested. He interviewed men with severed hands, not accidentally wounded, but deliberately amputated by force publique soldiers. He documented villages where the population had fallen from thousands to hundreds due to violence, famine, and forced forest treks for latex. He recorded cases of children being decapitated, homes being burned, women and children taken hostage to force rubber production from their husbands. But Casement was not just collecting horror stories. He was a consular official, trained in documentation. He took sworn statements. He recorded names, dates, and locations. He built a case that could not be dismissed as rumor. Here is one passage from his report, in his own words. He described returning to villages he had known 16 years before, large and flourishing centers of population that were, in his words, today entirely gone. The full report ran to about 60 pages, 40 pages of analysis followed by 20 pages of individual witness testimonies. Every page was footnoted. Every claim could be verified. And when Casement submitted his report to the Foreign Office in early 1904, the British government faced a problem it had not anticipated. The report was irrefutable, but publishing it in full would create a diplomatic crisis with Belgium and expose the fact that Britain had done nothing while a signatory to the Berlin Act systematically violated every humanitarian pledge of that treaty. The official story is that the Casement Report was published in 1904 in full and transparently. The records show something different. The British government initially suppressed the full text of the report for what it called diplomatic reasons. Only excerpts were published in 1904. The names of perpetrators were redacted. Individual witnesses were identified by numbers rather than names, and the full document was buried in the Parliamentary papers, available in theory, but difficult to find and harder to read. As one document from the Foreign Office put it, "My dispatch explained that the names in the report had been suppressed, not from any want of confidence in the central government of the Congo state, but..." The sentence trails off into diplomatic hedging. What the British government did not want the public to see was how direct the chain of responsibility was. The atrocities were not the work of rogue officials. They were the inevitable outcome of a system designed by Leopold himself, a system of forced labor, hostage-taking, and mutilation that could not exist without the king's explicit approval. Even in its redacted form, however, the report was devastating. When excerpts reached the public, the response was immediate. The British Parliament debated the report. Newspapers published the most shocking passages, and a journalist named E.D. Morel, who had already been campaigning against Congo abuses, saw his work vindicated in the most dramatic way possible. Morel was a remarkable figure. A French-born British journalist who had worked for a shipping company, he had noticed something suspicious early on. The ships leaving the Congo carried enormous quantities of rubber and ivory. The ships arriving at the Congo carried guns, ammunition, and manacles. The pattern was unmistakable. Rubber and ivory were being forced out at gunpoint, and the tools of violence were flowing in to keep the system running. In collaboration with Casement, Morel founded the Congo Reform Association in 1904, the same year the report was published. The association launched a global publicity campaign. They recruited celebrities: Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes; Mark Twain, who wrote a biting satire of Leopold's regime. The campaign spanned Britain, the United States, and continental Europe. And the campaign worked. Pressure mounted. King Leopold, who had spent years and a fortune on public relations to portray himself as a benevolent philanthropist, found his carefully constructed image crumbling. In July 1904, facing international outrage, he issued a decree appointing a commission of inquiry to investigate his own administration. The commission visited the Congo from October 1904 to February 1905. It interviewed witnesses, it reviewed documents, and its findings, published in late 1905, confirmed everything Casement had reported. The commission confirmed the forced labor, the mutilations, the kidnappings, the systematic violence. Leopold had been forced to investigate himself, and even his hand-picked commission could not deny the truth. Within 3 years, the pressure became unbearable. In 1908, the Belgian government finally annexed the Congo Free State, taking it out of Leopold's private hands. The territory was renamed the Belgian Congo, and the king who had presided over one of the worst humanitarian catastrophes of the modern era died in 1909, his reputation in tatters. But here is the question that history still struggles to answer. Why did the suppression work for as long as it did? And what happened to the man who made it possible? The man whose report finally forced the world to look? For his work in the Congo, Roger Casement was honored. In 1905, he was appointed a Companion of the Order of St. Michael and St. George, a significant diplomatic award. He continued his career, serving as British consul in Brazil, where he conducted another major investigation into atrocities against indigenous people in the Putumayo River region. That investigation led to a knighthood in 1911. Sir Roger Casement was, by any measure, a model British public servant. He had exposed 2 of the worst human rights catastrophes of his era. His work had forced policy changes. He had saved lives. But Casement was also Irish. Born in Dublin, raised in a Protestant family, he had developed a growing distrust of imperialism over the course of his career. In 1913, ill health forced him to retire from consular service, and he returned to Ireland just as the movement for Irish independence was gaining strength. Within months of his retirement, Casement helped form the Irish National Volunteers, a paramilitary organization dedicated to securing Irish self-rule. When World War I broke out in August 1914, Casement made a decision that would destroy everything he had built. He traveled to Germany. He sought German assistance for the Irish independence movement, and he attempted to recruit Irish prisoners of war to fight against Britain. In April 1916, Casement returned to Ireland by German submarine. He was arrested almost immediately, brought to London, and charged with high treason. His trial was swift. On June 29, 1916, he was convicted. On August 3rd, he was hanged at Pentonville Prison. But before his execution, something else happened. Copies of Casement's personal diaries were circulated privately among British officials. The diaries contained detailed descriptions of homosexual practices. Their circulation was not accidental. It was a deliberate campaign to discredit Casement, to destroy any public sympathy for him, and to ensure that his name would never become a rallying cry for Irish nationalists. The diaries worked. The campaign to reprieve Casement collapsed, and for decades afterward, his name was associated not with the humanitarian heroism of the Congo Report, but with scandal and treason. What was lost when Casement was executed? Not just a man, not just a career, a voice. Because here is what the records show. Casement's report did not just expose atrocities, it established a new standard for human rights investigation. He was described by modern scholars as the father of 20th century human rights investigations. He did not rely on hearsay. He traveled to the source. He interviewed victims directly. He took sworn testimony. He documented everything. And he published his findings openly so that the world could see what he had seen. After his execution, the British government worked hard to bury his legacy. The diaries, their authenticity debated for decades, were used to paint Casement as a degenerate, not a hero. His knighthood was not rescinded, but it might as well have been. For nearly a century, his name was taught in Irish history as a cautionary tale about treason, not in world history as a model of investigative courage. And the Congo Report itself? It remains publicly available. You can find it on the Internet Archive. You can read the DjVu file, page by page, the same document Casement submitted to the Foreign Office in 1904. But it is not taught in most schools. It is not referenced in most discussions of colonial history. And the full scale of what happened in the Congo Free State, the systematic brutality, the millions of deaths, the severed hands collected as bureaucratic paperwork, remains on the margins of public memory. Today, the Democratic Republic of the Congo still bears the scars of Leopold's regime. The borders the Berlin Conference drew in 1885, borders that paid no attention to ethnic groups, linguistic regions, or natural resources, remain largely unchanged. The centralized authoritarian model Leopold established became a template for future Congolese governments. The wealth extracted from the Congo soil, first rubber, then copper, then diamonds, then coltan, continues to flow outward, enriching foreign companies, while the Congolese people remain among the poorest on earth. The pattern documented between 1885 and 1908 looks familiar when you compare it to subsequent resource extraction regimes in Africa. The same structure, a centralized authoritarian administration, local populations compelled to labor for foreign-owned companies, violence used to enforce quotas, profits flowing outward. Which brings us back to where we started. In 1904, a British diplomat submitted a 40-page report to the Foreign Office. The report contained sworn testimonies from Congolese survivors. It named specific perpetrators. It documented systematic brutality on a scale that shocked the world. The British government suppressed the full text, redacted the names, buried the evidence in parliamentary paperwork. And then, 12 years later, the man who wrote the report was hanged for treason, his reputation destroyed by a smear campaign that focused not on his work, but on his private life. Here is what we know. Roger Casement's report was accurate. The atrocities it documented were real. The suppression of its full findings was a deliberate act of diplomatic damage control. And the campaign to destroy Casement's reputation after his arrest was organized, effective, and successful for nearly 100 years. Here is what we do not know. How many other reports like this are sitting in archives right now, suppressed, classified, or simply buried under bureaucratic paperwork? How many people have told the truth about something important, only to have their words redacted, their names smeared, their careers destroyed? The records are public, but rarely discussed. The evidence is available. It simply isn't promoted. Here is one thing you can verify for yourself. Go to the Internet Archive. Search for Casement Report. The full DjVu file will be there. page by page, witness by witness, village by village. Read the testimonies, look at the dates, compare the names, and ask yourself this question. What else is sitting in the archives, waiting for someone to look?